that are relevant to the area of interest here. So the paper we agreed on is now, looking in retrospect, slightly off from so that's the challenge of those arrangements. Slightly off from of course the topic of talk, but it's probably more technically focused, whereas you were more looking on a holistic perspective of security awareness. But we now digging down into educating, I guess, security specialists in a way, right? So would you want to give an overview of the paper? What, in a sense of what does the paper do, and what are the different aspects? What are the kind of questions the paper asks, or what does it want to achieve, and the method it employs? And then also give us afterwards your insight as to what you think about the paper and what's good and what's bad, and of course what's ugly.
Okay. Like you were just mentioning, it was a little bit more technical than I. Oh, should I stand up? It was
no. Please sit it. No, it's fine.
It was a little bit more technical than I expected, and basically, it seemed like what they were trying to do was take a game that was a centralized game and make it a little bit more modular, and use the outcome from the game to test to see like a correlation between using the game and how well people did in the course. And like I said, I did see a lot of correlation between what they were getting the flags and how they were doing the flags, and what the people learned in the course, but I didn't really see exact causation, because there was no way of really saying that because of the game, that's why people were doing a little bit better. Yeah. So I couldn't really see that. I didn't really see that beyond a shadow of a doubt. Yeah. And they had some ideas of what that might do or why that might be, but even that they didn't really go into to any extent. So basically, a capture the flag game on a virtual module on each computer, so that the students didn't have to have access to the internet. And they use very specific students, like second-year undergrad students and master students, to see if there is a correlation between that as well. So, one of the things I really took notice of is how much they talked about the aspect of cheating and how people would be able to cheat. And I understood quickly why they wanted to make sure that, okay, if you got the flag, you had to explain your whole process. And I can understand how a person would cheat, because it's just like, well, it's probably just one process. I'll copy a flag, copy the same process, and change a few words, and everything will be fine. But how they did that, how they hashed it out, how they used the crypto to kind of hash it out to make sure that everybody had different flags, really flagged who was who and who was actually not doing what they were supposed to be doing. But it also opened up an idea of perhaps somebody was so good at it that if they could get a flag and they could change it, they might be able to, if they can get to their own flags more easily than they assumed that it was possible, they could also just write the same thing, but because they had an authenticated flag, there didn't seem to be any kind of back checking that way. So if you got the right flag, whatever you wrote seemed to be okay. Now, what if you got the right flag because of your technical expertise, and then just wrote something so poor that they just assumed that you didn't really grasp the course, when what you didn't grasp was even doing the right thing. You just got the right flag and signed out and got your grade. So there was a few things I saw that their conclusions weren't all encompassing. So I just looked at it that way. But it was very technical, so I was.
But so yeah, I think you pitched some of the shortcomings in terms of. Were there some elements that you think they're actually good in the paper? Like, is there some aspects that would be?
Well, the thing about when they were talking about analysis, I really liked that they were doing analysis, because not enough people do so. They talked about the levels that they were using for the training of the Linux, and I thought that was important, because not only did they actually train you, they taught you something new, but they also used a leveled approach. Like, as you got to learn one thing, you got something, and then you got to the next level, you got something. So they were almost using a gamified approach with teaching that in that system. So I thought that was really well done. But
which concept does it relate to that we talked about? The leveling thing? Yeah, what's the?
Damn those lectures.
Yes.
thresholds? No.
Yeah, that after that.
Definitely was evolved. Okay.
Scaffolding, perhaps?
Right.
So you know that you scaffold to the user's needs to some extent, but also, I mean, you have it implicitly there. In fact, your iterative learning is precisely that, right? So you could take it up a notch, right, every time, right? You do the same thing, and you teach it again, right? If you have been suffering through the bachelor here, you may have noticed that as well, because we do the same thing. We seemingly talk about the same thing again 5 lectures later, but on a slightly different level. I'm not sure, perhaps you didn't notice, but that's the scaffolding thing, and I think you're right. So there's actually, you see here particular, this paper is kind of heavy on education actually, right? If you look at it, right? Yes, security is of course in there, but in the end what they're describing is about the educational process as a metric for their outcomes there, right? So, and I think I agree, the design and the analysis in a way is quite rich there. But I leave it to you first before.
They also had the learning at your own pace that I thought was very important, because they made it so that you can get your flag at your own pace, and you weren't really penalized as long as you made the deadline. There wasn't like the quicker you get it done, the higher your grade was. It was like you get the grade for getting it, or you don't get the grade for getting it, and it didn't matter how much time you took. So that gave different students the opportunity to work at their own pace without any kind of need to cheat if they didn't want to.
Yeah. So who was first?
Okay. I lost my train of thought. No, I think like this kind of way of doing exercises and education really suits those who are free thinking and creative, because most of security is about being creative, trying different solutions. If that doesn't work, try some other things. And I think for some people that can be really hard. And like they had the deadline, but they had like 2 to 3 weeks per flag. And I believe that it really hinders some people in getting it started, because some are natural free thinkers and creative in their way of approach, and others are not. And also the fact that they got graded, or part of the grade was how they solved it. So like you can have different methods of attack, and how optimized way of attack you chose, the better your grade was. And that's like, some people sit in lectures and get that knowledge and try it, while others will think like this is the most optimized way of doing it, and this is the right solution of doing it. So like when a lecturer provides different ways of doing it, it's a kind of weird way to score people in creativity. Or like you're not going to find 0 days attackers in this course. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's misleading or just being much better for creative students.
That's cool. We'll come back to it. You had
regarding the cheating, there was a lot of focus on like hard cheating, like taking somebody else's flag and stuff like that, but not very much about cooperating, like teaming up, like
that's good. Yeah.
Because the way when I read through it, first of all the cheating part, I was looking. It seemed like it should have been first, because that was all I was thinking of, like the entire paper. It was like, okay, but they can cheat on this like 50 different ways. But when they mentioned it, they mentioned like cooperative. The way I see I would have done it was not like just taking somebody else's flag. That seems kind of stupid. But rather just working as a group with 2-3 students, just figuring out the learning outcome, probably the same, but since it's graded, and it's an individual task, it's like didn't really come up in that paper at least.
But I think that's kind of what happened, because when they started talking at the end that the students that did the best kind of didn't seem to really grasp what was going on, well, because they didn't go through the course. But if 3 students got together and then just attacked the system and then figured out how to do it and get the grades, of course they're not going to be able to retain anything because they didn't do the actual work. And I mean, they almost have the data out there to prove that point, but never mentioned it.
Yeah. So like I think it's all about motivation. So like a task can either make you to copy somebody because you have to reach a deadline. That's your motivation. Pass the course. Or you can team up and do discussion because you see the learning value, outcome of it, and once you do it, and motivation on an individual level. So like in all range of students that will vary, but they didn't mention it like directly. But when you saw the graphs and correlation, it was like people who do or get high grades in other courses also scored high here, meaning they probably have high motivation. So like they didn't state it out there, but it was, they had the data, as you said, Luke.
Can you make that claim stronger? Because the paper has one thing is really insightful, and that's I want to get to that in the discussion as well. The motivational aspect. What not only, so of course you said there's a correlation. Other papers, this paper get high points, but what specific insight did they get? There was one particular comment they made with respect to performance in this course and other courses related to that on page 5. Student perception of courses.
They did say that.
No.
It's an open thing, so
They did say that students found the course harder, but enjoyed it way better.
Yeah.
And well, that goes with the motivation thing, and still part with the group work, because even if they find it harder, well, they can team up and they will still learn things, and because they have to do it on their own virtual machine, they will have learned it and done it by themselves.
Yeah.
So whatever happens, they will have learned, even if they work in group. And yeah, because they have to do the thing themselves, they have more motivation. But the thing about the flag and the fact that they might find different ways to do it, that they still have feedback. And I think they might not have discussed it enough. They discussed it a bit. The fact that feedback was, in a way, the most important thing for the students.
Mm-hmm.
They said that it's really important, and it's the major part of labor for the teachers.
But they seem kind of like almost salty about it, because they stated that the students said that without the written feedback, or the written feedback was very valuable, because then you had the automated grading process and the written. But then they also stated that that was the longest and most tedious work for the like sensors and those who run this. So they were like, yeah, the students really valued it, but we spent a long time on it. So I can't like draw a conclusion from their statement about if it's a good thing or a bad thing.
So I'm bringing the theory. So to go further in this direction, you're spot on, right? It's about motivation. What specific, what implicit, that is one of the weaknesses of the paper to some extent, but I think they implicitly said something about what kind of motivation they thought they found or activated. What kind of motivations do we know about? I really sense that my lectures...
extrinsic.
Sorry?
Extrinsic.
Right.
Grade.
Right. And the intrinsic one? So
kind of knowledge, I guess.
Well, but which claim do you derive from their observations they're doing? So their observation was that I'm paraphrasing in a way, but the observation was that the course was hard, the grades was worse than in other courses, but it was still the most liked or second most liked course in the semester. What does it tell me? Did they rely on grades to be motivated for the course?
They need the extrinsic motivation as much as the intrinsic, because, and I mean, the thing that I was looking at is there was two ways of cheating. One was just stealing somebody else's flag. But if you were actually trying to hack the system, you probably had a little bit more intrinsic motivation than the extrinsic, because it was like, what's this exercise? Like, what do I care about this exercise? You know what would be interesting? Actually just trying to see if I can hack at the flag. And, you know, it doesn't take more than one or two people to say, hey, you know, you think we can get to the flag? Do you think it'll be easier? It's going to be harder, but if we work together. Yeah, so, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for the data that they collected, and how they read it might have been a little bit different.
Right. Yeah, of course, there's those technical intricacies. But I think the point is the fundamental claim, I mean, from a serious gamer point of view, we talk always about alignment, right? An alignment, in order to have long-term success as opposed to short-term entertainment with conventional games, is to have sustained, you know, insight and experience, right? So the learning is fundamental. And you may recall the claim was, if we align extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, as talked about in the Levy monitoring paper there, right? So basically, then we activate long-term behavior. So their fundamental claim is that the students probably took away something in terms of learning about security because of that observation, right? So I think they didn't make it as clear as they probably should have, but it's really, really strong because it shows something about their achievement. And I agree with you, correlation, causation, it's not the same thing. But I mean, it's really hard in an educational context to be really clear about causation, right? Because you're right, there's this correlation between well-performing high school students coming to the great degree. I sometimes have the impression we don't teach them anything. They'll just learn on their own, intrinsically motivated. They may or may not show up to lectures, but they will succeed and be A students at the end of the bachelor. Doesn't matter, right? So we're actually not teaching those guys technically anyway, right? So because they sometimes teach us, in fact, right? So but we're actually teaching on different levels. And similarly here, but I think it's this is not captured. So I agree with your statement there, but I think it's still an interesting insight that's worthwhile reporting, and for you when you look into the paper to realize, okay, this. You can read between the lines what it actually means, right? That they actually managed to convert the motivational aspects.
But I don't always think that grades are extrinsic motivation, because like for me at least, from experience, a grade for me is a status report on how much knowledge I've drawn from it.
Yeah.
So like, it's not that I got a B or I got an A. That's good for work later. It's more like, okay, I did good in this course, therefore I probably learn a lot.
Yeah.
It's like I think you can combine them, but grades are not always like a metric that's eccentric motivation.
Yeah.
Like people aiming for high grades are just wanting to pass the course and get a good resume.
Yeah. I agree with you, of course. That's something that could be captured in a a priori interview, right? Where you actually ask, what are you motivated by, right? So you can kind of gauge are they more, how do they interpret grades? But by default, we kind of fall back to see grades as an extrinsic motivation because, and I suspect, looking at the setting in which they did it, it's in the UK, I suspect that it's more typically extrinsically motivated there. Because I don't know, personal experience, we find this more in those contexts that there's extrinsic motivation way higher. But the point is, they really converted the motivation. The other thing I wanted to make that comes back to your point you're making in terms of learning. What did they learn? Well, we have on the one hand we're learning skills or teaching skills, and on the other hand we're teaching knowledge, right? So this discourse. And usually in universities, traditionally they're kind of K-heavy, knowledge-heavy, and not so much skills-heavy. And we have different two types of assessment that corresponds to those ones. And they were quite clear about what they want to do. Well, we didn't talk about this, but we have so-called summative assessments and formative assessments. And summative assessments are usually the ones exam at the end, right? We teach you the whole stuff, and then you have 2 days to actually bring everything into your brain, briefly activate your neurons, right? So they can actually fire when needed, corresponding to the questions you actually find on paper. And 1 week later, surprise, surprise, all gone. The metaphor for you would be after lunch, all is gone, right? So it's basically in a practitioner, from a practitioner perspective here. And they kind of, one of the points why I think it's also worthwhile, a valuable lesson here from not only skill development, but also alignment in terms of serious games, it's that it's kind of a longitudinal exercise, right? So they had a formative assessment. They don't really care about the final exam so much. I actually don't recall if there was a final assessment. Was there a final assessment? No, right? Only the flags. So that means they have completely internal assessment. So it was a very continuous check. If you like marks, or as a status, or as a checkpoint basically, then it's perfect aligned with your motivation in a sense, because you will continuously know how you stand in the course, right? So that's what we call a kind of a formative assessment. It changes your skill by giving you immediate feedback. And that's again linked to your discussion about feedback, that it was so valuable to students. That's not just having the exam, cool, you get an A-, cool, well done, right? But actually you get continuous feedback, can learn and refine, and can improve on that. You have kind of an experiential learning, right? It's not a one-off, good exam, that was it, and then you forget about mobile. But actually, can reuse that experience to entrench it. So I think this was quite insightful. I think they could have made more out of the paper. By analyzing it a bit deeper, but at least they took a leap into it. And I think you guys should try to look deeper into specifically, what educational strategies did they apply, what kind of learning did they achieve, what learning do you think they achieved but did not report, or what learning did they think they achieved but misreported, So sometimes there may be bold claims that they are totally unsubstantiated, and this could be criticism, as William pointed out, that actually a misread causation correlation, right? Because they actually didn't gather enough entry-level data to know enough about the participant pool to draw the conclusions they're actually drawing at the end, right? So that's certainly a risk that you have here as well. And yet the interesting thing is the game has changed over the course, right? From a possibly cooperative game, it became a competitive game, right? So, and I had the impression that it probably was down to this offline approach, right? So that you don't have this the online interaction, the direct interaction, that would probably incorporate firstly more timeliness in your approach, and less isolation, so more opportunity for actually cooperating because you are working real time anyway, right? Having Discord open or Slack or whatever means of communication is very inviting suddenly, as opposed to doing it on a Saturday night on your own. You know what I mean? So there could be, I don't know, that's just something they could have discussed or explored as well, that just the setup, the environment could have changed the outcome of the game. That's what I'm saying, right? So nothing else. There's no explicit point here. Anyway, I took over a bit, but I just wanted to bring those points back because you all touched on them, right? But there can be deep interpretations associated with them, right? So now I want you for the analysis in the paper to kind of bring it back to this analytical level where you look at learning, education, purpose of the entire exercise and how it links back, of course. Yeah, so that will be the case for all your papers in a widest sense, and of course very much for this as well. Are there other comments? Sorry, I just wanted to get that out.
Well, bringing it back to William's highlighting of money, they said that they overall got better grades but a higher satisfactory level in their students. But like for a university, having courses with a high grade average is better than having mostly satisfied students. In terms of like, you report your grades to Norway, we report to SSB or something, and you have statistic on it, and like a school with high overall grades are a good school. It's like kind of
that is a matter of discussion.
Yeah.
So so it can be, but it could just mean the courses are shit easy. I mean, come on. I mean, seriously, right? So if you dumb down the course, then you get good grades as well. So measuring, I think that's a different discussion. I think, but this, I think it's just the wrong metric.
Well, they might be able to align the two a little bit better. Knowing what the difference is, just align the two, because it's like, oh, they don't get good grades if they do this, but there is learning going on and it's going in this direction. Well, maybe if that's a worthwhile direction to go in, maybe that should be the basis of the grade instead of what we're actually basing it on now. So.
But then you need a secondary metric to assess the actual learning outcome, as opposed to, whatever you want to say, the learning progress or the formative outcomes and so on, as opposed to just the grades, right? If you just use the numeric grades, it's simple to analyze. But I'm very skeptical of those values because, so that's...
But with the reverse engineering task, they did it the first year, and they saw that most people struggled a lot with it, and they excluded it in the next iteration. So they kind of like saw that this was a big hurdle for most people, therefore it probably doesn't give a lot of learning outcome or gross dissatisfaction with the students. So they saw that some of the tasks had negative effect on the overall group, and then adapted.
What concept did we talk about related to that?
Balance.
Yeah, balance, of course. Yeah, but very specific term, very specific concept, with a author name I can't pronounce. That is the hint I want to give away. Which briefly talked about a quadrant concept. So I'm just throwing all the theories that I gave you back at you. So because I want you guys to apply that, right? We talk about concept of flow. Right? And how do you keep people in the zone, right? Well, you give them something that's a challenge level that corresponds to their skill level, right? In this case, we had an example where the challenge level vastly outpaced their skill level at that stage. Entry-level students, reverse engineering, they were here, up there, it was the frustration zone, right? So they were not open to learn anymore. They were unable to learn because they were unable to even comprehend, right? So it's a good example where they are gauging their balance in a wider sense, their assessment went wrong in terms of pitching the course. But this is really insightful in terms of learning styles as well, in terms of and also learning the scaffolding in particular, right? So that's quite good, very good point there. Cool. Other comments regarding the paper? Who didn't like the paper? No one really has a. You're not kind of a fan.
Yeah.
Okay. Any specifics? Any? Is it just more like, yeah, nah, not my thing, or is it more along the lines, I didn't like it because? Is there something concrete that you feel like?
No, nothing concrete. I think I understand what it's trying to do. I just don't think it's that successful at doing it.
Okay.
It's just basically you have a CTF and you do it, and yeah, I think it's kind of, I don't know, self-explanatory that it's supposed to, that people are happy. It is something people do for fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the learning, I have like the all they found in the learning outcome was the grading. When you're the person that decides the grading, doesn't really. Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah. That's right. So there are some, but on the other hand, it could also be because you're used to quite a lot of experimental learning approaches already.
Yeah.
So they kind of, oh, come on, seriously, that's so 80s. So because if you have been in Simon's courses, he sometimes takes odd directions anyway. So that's something to. But in some contexts, it is reasonably innovative. So
Yeah.
you had a comment.
Yeah, they didn't go into a lot of detail of it, but I really didn't like how the starter program, when you first installed the EM, kind of like behaved, because that program was supposed to generate the flags and kind of like do all the setups. But what happens if that program fails? So like, what if the program generates a crypto text which the server validator doesn't recognize? Because you as a student don't participate anything being wrong. So like, if anything's go wrong, you can go the whole course without knowing anything is wrong. So like, they didn't write anything about it, but that was something which came into mind. Like, what if the starter program fails? And it self-deletes afterwards also, you can't like, is the standard error logged to the server or what?
Interesting, yeah. That's a good observation.
Well, that was the problem with Blackboard when I first started with the master's program. It was doing weird things, and nobody knew what the problems were, and we would try to explain it, and it was just like, okay, well, I can't get to this site, and then my instructor said, well, I can. It's like, well, maybe you have more rights than I do, and it's like, well, I don't know. That's important, because if I can't submit my paper, what can I do? So that actually gave me a problem, and I got a bad grade on a course because I couldn't turn in a paper.
Yeah,
so.
that's not. That shouldn't happen again.
And then I found out that the problem was the teacher had more access than I did. That's why it worked for her and not for me.
Right.
So I know they mentioned that they didn't have any central oversight, and that can be a problem.
Right.
That can be a problem.
No, that's a good point. Good catch, actually. So that's So I think they just ignored a lot of this tech discussion and really shifted to educational setting. I wouldn't even be surprised if they somewhere have another outlet, have a different paper where they just focus on the tech, like a workshop where they describe all that thing. So it's just the focus of that paper. But it's a very good catch that you have here. And by the way, in terms of submissions, we'll manage it in a way so it works out. So don't worry about it, right? So we'll not have. We use the wiki-based approach. Don't worry about it. We'll sort that out. So you will have the sufficient access. In fact, you should have already. So thank you for that session. That was actually a good first insight, first direction. So it, slightly different from what I expected, admittedly.
What did you expect?
No, because I didn't know your background. So I didn't know that you have such the plethora of practical insights that you're sharing with us. So. And slightly different than I expect because of our unexpected change of classroom. That said, the classroom environment is not too bad here, right? So I think need to see what my head of department says if I occupy this for the upcoming sessions. But yeah, I will see about this. But anyway, thank you very much for making it happen. For you to come down in the first place and for your contribution to the paper, right? So everything you said will be very helpful for William, but also for you, because everything we talk and do here about is, may find introduction to one extent or another into the oral exam, right? And you're of course more than welcome also to bring inspirations from our discussion points. We talk about theories and alignment and so on into your papers, right? So you have kind of some transfer effort in the widest sense. That as we talked about in this context, it also applies here. So you can relate between different papers or fields and so on. Right? So thank you very much for that. So any more questions, comments? Your part, you. Okay, cool. Well, thank you much.